everyone, and welcome back to the Bible Said What podcast. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm going to be your host today, along with my co-host, Dr. Beck Taylor. If you'd like to get to know a little bit more about me, a little bit more about the podcast, be sure you go check out our social media at Bible Said What with underscores between the words. Well, today we are wrapping up our series on pursuing righteousness through living in right relationship with each other. And today we are ending off with how we can pursue righteousness through living in right relationship in our professional relationships and in positions of authority and how we lead those around us. So I have Dr. Beck Taylor. He is the president of Samford University, where I am a proud Bulldog. So Dr. Taylor,
Bulldogs.
Go Bulldogs. Would you like to introduce yourself, just talk a little bit about what you do?
Sure. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, for inviting me to appear on your podcast. I'm a big fan. And
you.
Just really appreciate you and appreciate the subject matter of the podcast. And I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely.
I'm in my third year as Samford's 19th president.
Yeah. You were a freshman president my freshman year.
We were freshmen together.
We were.
And we will graduate together.
Yes, sir.
And so love Samford University, love our community, its students, love leading an institution of higher education that invites students to the intersection of Christian faith and learning, and just always excited to participate and be proximate to students doing what they love to do.
Yes, sir.
And you clearly love to do this.
Yes,
and
I
so
do.
I'm excited about our conversation.
Me too. Well, thank you. As you mentioned, Samford has just such a special culture of pouring into one another through Christ's love. And so whenever I was thinking about doing a podcast on servant leadership, I was thinking there's no better option than to choose the president of the place that I love most, that has fulfilled me so much. So yeah, I guess with that being said, we're going to go on and get into it. So just starting off, I would love to ask you a couple questions about your philosophy behind servant leadership, your experience with servant leadership. So the first question is, what was the first leadership position that you ever held? It can be small or it can be big.
Yeah, well, what a great question to reflect on. I do think, Elizabeth, that God has always kind of positioned me and called me to positions of leadership. Some of my earliest memories of leadership were serving on particularly critical positions on athletic teams. So somehow, growing up as a grade schooler, I always found myself being the catcher on the baseball team or the quarterback on the football team or the point guard on the basketball team.
Right.
And while all positions are important
Of course.
in those sports, those positions tend to be ones that carry a little bit more of the burden of leadership. But outside of athletics, I think the first real position of leadership that I sought and served in was freshman class president in my high school. My family and I had recently moved from Texas to Florida.
Oh, wow.
And so I was starting at a brand new school, and I was looking for a way to get to know people and to be known. And I thought, what better way than to run for class president?
Yeah.
I ended up winning, which was a surprise. And so I think that was my first kind of office or my first position that had some leadership responsibilities with it.
Wow, that's incredible. I was the president of my senior class.
Okay.
So I can kind of relate. That's crazy that it was your first year and you still stepped up in that position.
Well, there was probably something about being new, the new kid, you know.
You're like, let's see what he does.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
But it was a great way to get to know my school and students, my class, and to begin to flex some leadership muscles here and there. I mean, there aren't too many weighty issues, frankly, as freshman class
Chocolate
president.
milk or strawberry milk in the calf.
Yes. I'm sure I had a whole platform of promises that I was going to deliver, but really just an opportunity to serve, to help lead on fundraising projects, to build a homecoming float, you know, to do all of the things that leaders do at that age, but really a good first opportunity to try on leadership and to begin to learn what it's like to work with people, to serve others, to put others' interests and needs before my own. Those were great opportunities for learning.
Absolutely. Well, clearly you have come a long way since then.
I hope so, yes.
Just a little. So what would you say are some of the biggest lessons that you have learned as you've grown in those leadership opportunities?
Yeah, sure. Well, leadership is service.
Absolutely.
And I'm not sure everyone aspires to leadership knowing that it really is a service role, and that the best leaders, certainly the best leaders I've ever known, are ones that put service in front of all other aspects of leadership. That service often looks like putting our own interests and desires and preferences aside
absolutely.
for those of others, wanting to ensure that others are fulfilling their goals and dreams and aspirations, even if it comes at the expense of some of our own. I think are important aspects of leadership that not all people really fully realize. I think other good, strong, and sometimes hard lessons that I've learned over many years of leadership is that as leader, my role is not to be the smartest person in the room.
Absolutely.
My role, my responsibility is not to know everything about everything. Now, I think good leaders do go to school on their organizations that they lead, and certainly I try to do that. But my job is not to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, I think the best leaders are people who surround themselves with incredibly bright, gifted, selfless people who are also eager to serve, and really form teams that can best meet the needs of the groups that they're leading. And so in many ways that reduces the pressure. And it's really, I think, later in my life and in leadership, it's caused me to spend more time and effort thinking well about the teams that I'm putting together. I spend a lot of time thinking about how the team here at Samford, my executive leadership team, how we're working together, how we're articulating goals together, how we're working for one another's interests and benefit. And so I spend probably more time thinking about those issues, or at least as much time thinking about those issues as I do the actual challenges and opportunities and problems that we're trying to solve.
Accountability and community are huge in leadership. And that's something that my dad taught me. My dad is a pastor. And so he is all about community and surrounding himself with good people, because we are most influenced by the 5 people that are closest to us.
That's right.
And in positions of authority, it is huge that those 5 people are solid in that. And they also help with, being accountable during conflict, because we cannot lean on our own understanding. We lean on the understanding of the Lord, and of course the wisdom that he's given to those around us. But of course, when there are groups of people, clearly there will inevitably be some form of conflict. And so as an authority figure, what are your strategies for handling conflict?
That's such a great question. And I think if I were to kind of riff on the previous question a little bit longer, I would say one of the things I've learned about leadership is that conflict is inevitable, and leaders are inevitably put in positions where they have to mediate conflict and help organizations and people navigate conflict. When the stakes are high and when the purposes of organizations are noble, well-qualified, faithful people are sometimes going to approach problems differently. They're going to sometimes see solutions that are informed by their own experience set, by their own giftedness and wisdom. And there are times when you've got people who disagree. And so there's really 2 forms of conflict I think I might talk about. The first is kind of external conflict. Again, it's pretty difficult these days to serve in a meaningful leadership role and not come under some scrutiny or criticism. And that's certainly true in my role. I know that there are decisions that we have to make as an institution, that I have to make as a leader, that aren't always going to be the favorite choice of some. And I have to be content with that. It is impossible to lead and try to be all things to all people. Or to try to make everybody happy. I want everybody in Samford's community to flourish. I truly do. But there are times when I have to put the needs of some over the needs of others. Or sometimes I have to make decisions that aren't going to be particularly popular, but really do serve the best long-term needs of the institution. And so I think leaders have to kind of have a gut check and be willing to say, I'm willing to dive into areas that I know are going to create sometimes some conflict or some criticism, and be comfortable enough in their own skin to not be cavalier, that is to kind of have a thick skin and let everything bounce off, but also not to be swayed by every wind of criticism that may come our direction. And in today's world of social media, in the 24-hour news cycle, and so many other things that I think contribute to that kind of cycle of conflict, I think leaders have to be particularly astute to understand how to kind of navigate that conflict, but also to be comfortable to some extent with that kind of conflict. We don't seek conflict,
of course,
but I think it's something we have to navigate. And then, of course, there's another kind of conflict that often is more internal to the organization. Leaders are leading teams of members who may disagree on a particularly difficult issue or a different policy prescription or a choice that the organization can make. And there, what I think is extremely important is to really value the different opinions in the room. People have a different opinion for solid reasons. And as a leader, as somebody who ultimately has to kind of sift through that conflict, I have to be able to distill what is truth and what is the most meaningful truth for whatever situation, opportunity, or challenge we're facing. And so assuming the best of people, I think, is particularly important in navigating conflict. Everybody's got an agenda. Let's just put that on the table. We're imperfect people. None of us is as selfless as we'd like to think we are. But ultimately, people, at least here at Samford, it's been my experience, people are really working hard for the best things. And if there's conflict, it's not because people are malcontented. It's not because they have evil in their heart. It's not because they are not good at their jobs. It's because all of the opposite of those things are true. They care deeply about what they're doing. They're very experienced and gifted in what they're doing. And so as a leader, I have to be able to assume the best of people, even when they're bringing conflicting pieces of advice or information. But ultimately, helping people who are in conflict see each other, value each other, find points of commonality. So often when we're in disagreement or in conflict, we fail to recognize that we agree on like 99%.
Exactly. It's that 1% that is blaring.
That's right. And so helping people to see that, I think, is important. And I think leaders have an opportunity and a responsibility for that. I think the last thing I would mention is that conflict in and of itself is not a sign of failure. In organizations that are doing good work, conflict can be inevitable, and it's how we deal with conflict and how we walk our communities through conflict that I think really separates faithful, effective organizations from those that aren't.
Absolutely. It is so important to remember, like you said, that you really are on the same team. And conflict is inevitable, but when it's handled well, it can actually be productive in a lot of ways, at least relationally. You learn a lot more about the people on your team and whatnot.
Elizabeth, I know you lament, as I do, so many examples in our culture and society where disagreement is seen as kind of the ultimate form of separation. And I'd love to be able to recapture, and perhaps we can begin to recapture on Samford's campus, the idea that in order to love someone deeply, in order to serve someone faithfully, doesn't mean that I have to agree, with every single thing. And see those disagreements as an opportunity to learn and to learn about others. I think we need to recapture some of that.
Yes, sir. One of my favorite classes here on campus is my favorite class because it is a discussion-based seminar style, and there are so many different viewpoints in the room. And I have learned so much from that class just by talking with and learning from other people who do not see the world the same way that I do. It is so incredible. And when that is taken into a leadership context of listening to people, understanding, but not being swayed in your own beliefs, that is such a solid system that you can build upon there. So do you have anything else to say?
I'm glad that you're having that experience in a classroom at Samford. I think that's really important.
Yes, it is very important, especially in a university education. That's right. One of the reasons that you come to college is to broaden your perspective, expand your thinking.
That's right.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, moving into our last question of the personal interview, how has your faith shaped how you view being in authority?
Sure. I've had the opportunity in my life largely to lead in faith-based organizations. I attended a faith-based college. had an aspiration to teach in a Christian university, and I had the great privilege of serving faith-based universities and growing in my leadership in each one. I don't know what it would be like to lead an organization where I couldn't articulate my faith or lead through my faith in a full-throated, kind of fully manifest way.
Right.
I have had the opportunity in the course of my career to be recruited potentially into secular or non-faith-based organizations. And I've had to always kind of ask myself, would I be as effective in those roles? We know that the Lord calls faithful people
absolutely
into secular organizations, and we're grateful that really faithful people lead in those kinds of organizations. But for me personally, I have always used faith as a lens through and by which I've exercised leadership and made decisions.
Right.
So for me, leadership and my faith in Christ are inseparable. And in fact, the vocabulary that I use and the examples that I draw upon and the language that I choose are all influenced by my faith in Jesus.
And that shows very well whenever you lead, from what I've seen.
Well, thank you. But that is simply to say, it would be hard for me to know how to lead well.
Right.
I might feel like I was leading with one arm tied behind my back, or with half my vocabulary, cut off. And that's just simply because I lack the experience, right, in leading in other kinds of settings. Now, as a university president, I am drawn into multicultural and multifaceted spaces where I can't necessarily always just kind of lead and articulate through a Christian worldview. But at my heart, I feel like I'm a Christian leader. I lead organizations that proclaim the name of Jesus. And so the idea of kind of leading through Scripture, leading through faith, leading through story, calling people to have a fuller identity of themselves in Christ, I think is the way that I can best lead.
Absolutely. Well, we see in Romans 12 that leadership is a spiritual gift.
That's right.
That the Lord gives. And how amazing that you have been able to do that in such an incredible context for so many years. I think this is a really good segue into the second part of our podcast, which will be talking more about just the biblical basis of servant leadership versus servant leadership, and what that looks like. For me, leadership and servant leadership are completely different things. Servant leadership is humbling yourself as Jesus did, and then leading through example of reflecting that. So the first question that I have, the first conversation starter, is what character traits of Jesus embody servant leadership?
Such a great question, and I appreciate your distinguishing between leadership and servant leadership.
Yes, sir.
I would argue that all good leadership is servant leadership.
Me too.
But as we both know, there are leaders that we could name, right, that don't put service to others at the top of their list. One of the great leadership traits that we see in Jesus, among many we could mention, humility, compassion, wisdom, I mean, we could go on and on,
right,
is that Jesus saw people. He saw people. I think good leadership is not just getting tasks done. It's not just checking the boxes. It's not accomplishing a strategy. These things are important and are parts of successful leadership. But those things, without understanding the human character and nature of the organizations we serve and the missions they serve and the people who bring themselves to benefit from these kinds of organizations, without seeing the people in those organizations, I think is missing the majority. Missing the majority of what we're doing. Think about a place like Samford. Samford is in the higher education space. We're a 4-year and comprehensive graduate institution. There's a lot that begs my attention on a daily basis.
Yes.
I'm almost like a small town mayor, right? We have restaurants, we have a public utility, we have a police force, we have housing, right? We've got all kinds of things that kind of make this seem like a small city. Right. And so you can imagine on any given day, there are a variety of things that command my attention. We have ambitious plans for the university. We want to become a better version of ourselves. And that plan calls us to set out ambitious goals and objectives, and we keep track of those things, and we try to make progress on those things. These are all important things. But at the end of the day, what is Samford? Right? If it weren't for the students we educate, the employees who come to work each and every day to serve our students, and the community of people this university influences. What I love about Jesus's model of leadership is that he first and foremost was a people person, right? He saw people, he ministered to people, he knew people, he took the time out of his very busy life. He had things to accomplish to minister to the needs of the people around him. Elizabeth, if I'm being perfectly honest with you today, I would say that on that kind of task orientation, people orientation spectrum, I sometimes lean a little bit more toward the task orientation.
It can be easy to fall into that. You probably have a lot of pressure to complete those things because they are very high level things.
And I just think my temperament sometimes is that. But what I've learned about myself over the years is that I have to be very intentional about always reminding myself and bringing myself back to this realization that it really is the people that matter. And so that's one of my favorite characteristics of Christ. When, one of my favorite stories, of course, is he's being hustled off, right, to heal the synagogue leader's daughter who's dying, right? A woman just touches the outer garment, right? And he could have had full satisfaction of knowing that woman's act of faith healed her. But he stopped, right? And he looked this woman in the eye. He saw her. He saw her pain. He saw her story. He ministered to her individually. That's just one of many examples we could cite of Jesus taking the time, right, to getting to know people.
Everything that you're saying is reminding me of John chapter 10. I'm going to pull it up, where it just talks about Jesus being a good shepherd. And it talks about how the sheep know his voice and he knows them. And because the sheep know their shepherd, they flee from anything that is not from those wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm going to pull it up. It starts in verse 7, and it says, "So Jesus again said to them, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I come that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep." And then it says, continuing in verse 16, "And I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock, one shepherd." And I just think that completely encapsulates what knowing people in servant leadership looks like, because you see your sheep and he knows the sheep, and because he knows the sheep are drawn to their shepherd there. And it also says that he lays down his life for his sheep. And I think when we translate that into a more modern version of servant leadership, hopefully that's not as drastic as laying down your life, but it's laying down your pride, your desires, and intentionally pursuing that connection. And I think that just makes all the difference between leadership and servant leadership, because also as a follower, you're not going to be nearly as inclined to follow someone who is leading you based off of a checkbook or based off of an agenda. Who, if you know your leader and you have a relationship with them, you can trust them. You can trust their leadership and really lean into that wisdom and learn from them in that, which I think is just so amazing.
Such a great reminder. So much truth in this passage that you read. Leader as shepherd is such a strong image, isn't it? And of course, Jesus embodied that in every way. Another characteristic that those verses remind me of in terms of Jesus' own character and his model for leadership is that Jesus was a truth teller. I think truth telling is such an important aspect of quality leadership.
Absolutely. Even if it's not what people want to hear.
Well, especially when it's what people don't want to hear. That verse talks about the importance of the shepherd's voice. Well, the shepherd speaks truth,
Yes.
and the sheep are able to trust the shepherd, because even when there's a storm coming,
Yes.
even when there's news that isn't as exciting to share,
Right.
or that may present challenge to the community, the shepherd still speaks that truth, right? And that in turn, I think, develops the trust that the sheep need to have. Today, I don't think we have to look very far in our cultural reference points,
Absolutely.
right? To see leaders who really want to tickle the ears of those from whom they're trying to garner praise or attention or support. And perhaps that's understandable in some contexts, but I think durable, long-lasting leadership is about sharing truth.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be hard to share as a leader. But I think that ultimately those who submit themselves to leadership of that type want to know, right? They truly want to know, what is our position? What is our situation? And then to know that a leader can sit down among the flock and devise a way out, to think about solutions, to count on the skills and expertise and heart of others to find solutions. I think that that's a great recipe for leadership. So there's a temptation sometimes to hide the truth, especially if it's hard truth from organizations or from people. But I don't think ultimately that serves the organization well, and ultimately doesn't serve the people well.
Right, absolutely. Well, you're kind of answering my next question. If you have anything else to add, I love this conversation. The next question is, how can we reflect Jesus by being shepherds to those around us? So that's kind of what you just said. If you have anything to add, please go for it.
I think some other aspects of being a shepherd are being present. It's hard to be a shepherd if you're not present.
Yeah, if your sheep are off in the field next door.
That's right. That's right. And while, I'll put it into my context, while I have a lot of demands on my time, and there are things that pull me away from the university from time to time, I always aspire to be present and among. And some of that is to be seen, some of that is to be involved, and certainly to let students, faculty, and staff know that I care about them and I care about what they're doing on a daily basis. It's why Julie and I, when we have free time, we choose to come alongside our students who are doing the things they love. Whether that's watch a debate team compete, or watch a performance of our opera this coming weekend, or go to a basketball game, or any number of things. We want to be among, our students. So being present, I think, is such an important part. It's hard to know a leader when that leader is on a pedestal or in the ivory tower, or whatever metaphor you want to use. Jesus certainly was present, right? He was always just so in the moment. And that's hard as a leader. I don't do it perfectly, certainly, but it's something that I aspire to.
Absolutely. And with Jesus's leadership being the Good Shepherd, we know Jesus, of course, was holy. And holiness is being set apart, yet he chose to interact and to be present and live on earth for 33 years with us. And he definitely did that with humility and intentionality. He wasn't, like you said, up on that pedestal, even though he completely could have been. He chose to come down, as we're about to celebrate in a couple weeks, coming down and being born in a manger. And that's exactly what servant leadership is. It's not domineering, or it is not a prideful authority, but a gentle, holy, set apart, but interacting, I'm with you. And that's what we're called to reflect, because not only are we called to be holy as, the Lord is holy, but we're called to reflect Christ as Christians, which the word Christian means little Christ.
Yeah. Those are great words, and I agree with all of it. I think that as leaders are thinking about leadership roles that they may be aspiring to, I think it just serves them well to think about what are their motives, right? What is it they're hoping to achieve? Right. And as we think about servant leadership, it's not building a resume. right? David Brooks, a fantastic New York Times columnist and commentator, social commentator, talks about the difference between resume virtues and eulogy virtues. Mm-hmm. Resume virtues being those things that you put on a resume that might get you that next job or might get you that promotion. Mm-hmm. But a eulogy virtue is what people are going to say about you.
Oh yeah.
Right? When you're gone.
Right. What were you about? What
if
was
leaders
your
are spending
heart?
more time on resume virtues, building resume virtues than eulogy virtues, then they're putting their efforts in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I do have one more question for us in this conversation, and it's how can we reflect servant leadership without being in a position of authority? Because not all of us are president of Samford University. Not all of us are in distinct leadership positions, yet we are still called to reflect the shepherding qualities of Christ. So what is your advice for people in those situations?
No question that each of us over the course of our lives are going to be placed in opportunities to shepherd others. Yes. Think about just the family context, mm-hmm. right? If people are blessed to be married and have children, certainly no better example of shepherding than being a parent, right? And so you're absolutely right. We all have the opportunities, most of us, to be able to embody the kind of characteristics that we've been talking about today. Mm-hmm. I think it's always important to know where the boundaries of our leadership stop and start.
Yeah.
I can tell you, Elizabeth, when I go home tonight and I walk through the front door, even though it's the front door of the president's house, I am not the Samford president at that point. I am Julie's husband. I'm Chloe's dad.
Mm-hmm. Peanut's dad.
Thank you. I am. I'm a congregant. I'm a friend. I'm a neighbor. I'm a community helper. These are all vocations that I embrace.
Right.
So I think for leaders, it's really important to know where the boundaries of our leadership begin and end.
Absolutely.
And where our other identities become important.
Absolutely.
If I were to wear the mantle of the Samford presidency in all of my relationships, I would not be a very popular person.
No.
And I would not be fulfilling the various vocations, that God is calling me to. Mm-hmm. But you're absolutely right. We each have the opportunity to model the Spirit of Christ in all of our interactions. Mm-hmm. What interactions do we have where we don't have the opportunity to be humble, to be compassionate, to put others' needs in front of our own, to seek the flourishing of others? Yeah. These are to love others unconditionally. These are all opportunities we have in our daily interactions with people. We don't have to be leaders. We don't have to hold a title. We don't get to wear a big chain around our neck at graduation to be able to embody these virtues, right?
Absolutely.
And to be Christ's hands and feet and love in a world that needs nothing more than those things. So I think we all have the opportunity to put on that servant leadership hat, or certainly to model the person of Christ, right? In the world, to be that light in life that God calls us to be.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and just pour into this podcast ministry.
Happy to do it. Yes,
it has been such an amazing conversation. I'm so excited to get this posted and get it on. But for all of you guys listening, I hope that you enjoyed. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me on our social media platforms, and be sure you go follow, subscribe, do all of the things. And remember, we will not have an episode next Thursday because it is Thanksgiving. So enjoy some time with your family, enjoy some good turkey, but we will be back the next week. So thank you guys so much. We hope you have a great day. God bless and go Bulldogs.